I will do my best to give an overview of beekeeping in general in our region across the Atlantic Canadian provinces, but will mostly focus on what I know and what we do on my farms. All right, here is Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada, of course, encompasses the four easternmost provinces in our country, being New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Here is my province of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is where I live and where I farm, and if you would like to know where my farm is, it's right here. My farm is located in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia, an area that's known for grape growing, but also known for tree fruit and for several orchards and pollination services. Now, I apologize if this slide is a little hard to read. I promise it's the only slide I have that's all text. There will just be lots of pictures after this, but I just wanted to do a quick overview of the regional's beekeeping characteristics. So altogether, the four Atlantic Canadian provinces, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Nova Scotia, make up about 37,500 colonies of bees. In total, this accounts to being about 5% of the country's beehives. Hives in our region are generally producers of wildflower honey blends and fruit blossom honey, and it is generally sold locally on the domestic market and through farm gate sales. The majority of the beekeepers that live in Atlantic Canada are small-scale beekeepers, backyard beekeepers. It's certainly a growing industry. There's still quite a lot of interest in the industry, and beekeepers, small and large scale, continue to come out of the woodwork. Even though only 5% of Canada's beehives are in Atlantic Canada, the region does have a long history of beekeeping. In Nova Scotia, our Beekeepers Association was founded back in 1895. So, to move on to New Brunswick. New Brunswick has about 7,000 colonies of bees and around 375 beekeepers and a whopping 38,000 acres of wild blueberry land. I mention this blueberry land because it is the wild blueberry pollination that has driven the increase of hives across the Atlantic region. Beekeepers in the province are largely situated in the south, while blueberry land is predominantly in the north. New Brunswick is known for having pretty long and harsh winters that often prevent beekeepers from accessing their hives before April, which really puts them in a unique challenge of getting their hives ready for a pollination service that often begins at the end of May. Prince Edward Island. PEI, the small island province of PEI, hosts about 5,000 colonies of bees and 45 beekeepers. Tough winters definitely also plague PEI and often result in a significant annual fluctuation in hive numbers. They, of course, too, as it says, also have about 12,000 acres of blueberry land. All right, Newfoundland and Labrador. Newfoundland now has about 750 colonies of bees and 100 beekeepers. There's really an unparalleled interest in bees in this province, and they have a very active bee club. These beekeepers in Newfoundland benefit from being one of the only places in the world that you can still keep bees without Varroa destructor. They do not have Varroa mites on the island of Newfoundland. There is also some pollination service on the rock or in the province of Newfoundland, and that's mostly in cranberry pollination. I just wanted to continue on Newfoundland just for another slide here, just to tell you a little bit, I guess, about how their season differs from the rest of the Maritimes. As I mentioned, they're a really small industry of just 750 hives right now, but very much kind of growing, tenfold every year, really, I think, in a lot of ways. They do have similar wildflowers to a lot of the rest of the Atlantic region, but perhaps just kind of a little more fireweed, I guess, that we'll see some of those photos later. They do have less pollination demand, which I referred to in the previous slide, and a very short and condensed season. They really get into their bees quite a lot later in the spring, and also are finished up quite a lot earlier in the fall. This often also means that their nukes that they would have available to increase the numbers are not available until the middle of July, which creates its own problems for building up those hives before winter. All right, on to my home province of Nova Scotia. We have the majority of the colonies in Atlantic Canada at about 25,000, and now over 600 beekeepers in the province. Our wild blueberry acreage sits in between 35 and 40,000 acres, and the province also boasts about 700 acres of tree fruit, the majority of which are apples. Okay, so before I go into some more detail about my farm and what we do, I just wanted to give a little shout out to our tech transfer team. We have a tech transfer team based in Atlantic Canada called ADA, or the Atlantic Tech Transfer Team for Apiculture. They're established in 2016 and were started by one of the inaugural members, Dr. Robin McCallum, is the head of the team, and she's joined by Sawyer Olmsted. And this team, which is headed, as I mentioned, by Dr. McCallum, has really quickly become integral to the sustainability of our industry on the East Coast. They're currently conducting trials on queen production, which you can actually read about in the summer edition of American Bee Journal. And they're also doing trials on nosema, miticide efficacy, and a variety of other things. So I encourage you to kind of check them out online if you're interested, but I really just wanted to kind of highlight them in this slide that we really appreciate their presence on the East Coast. Okay, so on to Cosman Wood and Honey and Forest Hill Apiary. Cosman and Wood and Honey was started by these folks on the top right, Tom Cosman and Marianne Whidden, husband and wife combo, 40 years ago now, in 1979. This farm started as a borrowed Richard Taylor book from a library in Vancouver and an inaugural honey crop that got eaten by bears. And it is now over 40 years grown into a farm that sustains a couple thousand colonies and 6 beekeepers and a full family. I have been with this farm for 11 seasons now. This is where I started my beekeeping career. And as I mentioned, their family is still very active on the farm. Forest Hill Apiary, which started in 2016, is my farm. That's my home in the Gaspereau Valley, which is the adjacent valley to the Annapolis Valley. It focuses solely on queen production. The Gaspereau Valley is known for vineyard growing as well and river tubing. We do a few odd things in Gaspereau, but otherwise it's a quiet and very heavily wooded place, which really allows me to have some great spots for queen mating. I'm sure that the Maritimers in the room don't know where Forest Hill is, and I kind of like it that way. So this is just a little overview of some of our Cosman kind of basic stats, I guess. So as I mentioned, we do maintain about 2,000 colonies of bees and have 6 beekeepers during the summertime. We focus on fruit pollination and wildflower honey production, and we do pack all of our own honey and do all direct market honey sales. All right, springtime. I do believe that spring in the Annapolis Valley is some of the nicest weather that we get in the Maritimes, and me as a beekeeper and the bees are very grateful for this. So our main jobs that we're focusing on in spring are to build up our hives towards our pollination season, to put in a varroa treatment, and just to complete some general hive inspections. I don't have many photos from kind of early spring, or certainly not this past spring. This past spring we were too busy swimming or snorkeling into our bee yards. We had a really unparalleled amount of rain this spring, but the bees bounced back very well. In the spring, we do bring our bees out of winter as 2-story colonies. I just wanted to mention that because this photo is from a little bit later in the season when we had a first super on. Our bees do overwinter in their summer yards, with a handful of them that will move in the fall if they don't have suitable winter locations. Sometimes though, we will generally try to access our bees at the end of March to apply an apivar treatment. And even though we do get into our bees at the end of March, it is very common for us to have some snow in April. These bees, I waited a couple of weeks, I think, before I dug them out again. But a few years ago, I should say, we had a heck of a lot of snow in Nova Scotia that lasted well into June, and it took me a little while to get into these hives. So this picture, those are full 4 hive pallets that are completely buried in the snow. Okay, so as I mentioned before, really what our main focus in the spring is to build up towards our pollination season. We're very much feeling like we're in crunch time to kind of get the bees ready. Just to kind of explain a little bit about the setup of our hives, we do keep all of our hives on quad pallets of 4 hives per pallet. As you can kind of see in this picture just from the lids here, the pallets sit all tight to each other on a pallet. We don't use telescoping covers, but we use a big common cover that would go over top of the entire pallet in winter or for mobility, for moving them around. As I mentioned, we do treat with Apivar in the spring, and generally speaking, we would probably average around a 15% winter loss is a number that we're happy with and a number that seems to be pretty sustainable on the farm. Our winter wrap, actually, which you can also see in this picture, we don't have any insulation on the top of the pallet in this photo, but the winter wrap that we put around the pallet is quite simply black pallet wrap. It's just stretch plastic, no insulation to it. Just a little bit more info about the setup of our hives. We do keep two double brood chamber colonies. And when we're rebuilding our numbers in the springtime to rebuild from our 15% winter loss, we do make full-bodied splits, just chop in 2 splits, just because we don't have time to build up nukes before that pollination season. So we will make a chop in 2 split. And the photo on the left is me in the spring in a really early apple orchard before there's any bloom on the trees. It's quite normal for us to leave our entrance reducers on until the pollen flow is quite steady in the spring. And those entrance reducers are just what we cut out of our scrap wood. Nothing too fancy. So just a little bit more about kind of the things that we're up to in the spring. We are checking our brood quality. We're checking for food, which we do quite early in the spring, even just from looking down from the top of a hive to make sure that there's several frames of capped honey left over. We'll move capped honey frames around in a yard if we need to. It's a little probably uncommon for some of the commercial operations in the Maritimes, but we don't feed sugar in the springtime. We do feed quite heavily in the fall, and just in our area we have pretty good spring pollen flow, and we've just found that it's not necessary for us to feed sugar in the spring. We will if we have to, but we find just by being able to move some honey frames around, we're able to keep the bees nice and full until they can start producing honey. We do use pollen patties, generally global patties, and this, as I mentioned, we do have a very nice pollen flow in our area, but it's just because of this crunch time thing again. We really want to build the bees as quickly as possible to our pollination season, so we will throw those patties on. In the spring, tree pollen is really predominant for us. We're very much counting down to the dandelion bloom, which is when we can really breathe easily. And the last point I have there about the insufficient blueberry pollen is just as a note, it's very important for us for the bees to have a very balanced diet before we send them to blueberry pollination, because blueberry pollen is not very protein rich for the bees. And we are not the only ones that are excited about those dandelions. When those dandelions start to bloom, the bees are certainly even happier than the beekeepers are. So, our first pollination event that we have during the year is apples. Apple pollination will start in mid-May. We pollinate about 7 orchards, and the earliest orchards that we have to bloom are bee yards that we keep our bees in all year round. So there's actually very minimal relocation of hives at this time of year, which is nice. I mentioned earlier that we have about 4,700 acres of tree fruit in Nova Scotia. This is actually down. There used to be about 8,500 acres 20 years ago. But I also mentioned on this slide that there's an increase in trees. So it just kind of goes to show the change in orchards. The orchards that are being planted now are dwarf varieties of apples that are grown on a trellis system. So even though the acreage is down significantly, the number of trees is actually up significantly. There isn't too much of a significant demand for bees in apple pollination. It's not something that we rent all of our hives to. It's really only a few hundred, and it is very local. The hives that we do relocate bees to are very much in our area, so it kind of goes well with our spring work that we don't have to move them very far to get them in the apple trees. The last point I just want to make about apples is just about the overlap of the seasons. We have always kind of pollinated the apples in our region and then moved those bees from apple pollination to blueberry pollination. But as the years go by, it's harder and harder to do that. It seems that the apple pollination will kind of go later and the blueberry pollination starts a little bit earlier. So it works well that we only have a few hundred hives in apples, because those ones we can just let be the last ones that will go to blueberries, because the overlap is more intense every year. All right, well, now we're up to what our entire spring has been building up for, our pollination season. We usually start chipping bees around the 21st of May. This picture is one of our holding yards that's called Texas. We don't own many of our bee yards, as most beekeepers don't, but we do own this little piece of land that we put a big gravel pad down so we could gather bees here and move them out to pollination. It's a lot of an easier setup for us. The pollination period is about 3 to 4 weeks, and the average pollination density in Nova Scotia is 5.5 per acre, but that really varies just depending on the grower. It's a pretty loose average. And there are maybe 17 to 20,000 acres in bloom per year in Nova Scotia. And we do, as you can see in this picture, send our hives with a full deep super to pollination. Oh, we're back to my map of Nova Scotia. So as you can see where my farm is on the right and where the blueberry land is, oh, it's right up here. So when we ship to our blueberry land, we go from the home farm, and I've indicated with a few arrows that we have to drive our bees around the province to get to where that little smiley face of blueberry land is. We have quite a lot of blueberry land spread around the province. That's just the main focal area that my bees go. But it is impossible to just put them on a boat or on a bridge that doesn't exist to get it seems like it would be much faster to go across the water. But we have the highest tides in the world in Nova Scotia, so all of that little kind of water land that's in between where I live and where the blueberry land is will empty and fill with water twice a day with the tide. So it is impossible to go across. We got to drive them all the way around. And as a result, the drive is about 3 hours. So when the bees do move to the blueberry land, we don't see them, we don't expect them until they are home again 3 to 4 weeks later. There is a high demand for bees in wild blueberry pollination. This is different from apples, as I mentioned. This demand has waned in the last few years because of an overproduction of blueberries and an abundance of berries on the market. Generally speaking, our bees come home looking really nice. They come home full, they make a good crop of honey, and they're ready for that summer honey flow. When we bring them home, we're kind of in a rush to bring them home again, because when they're back, the first of the clover bloom is starting to happen, so we're eager to get them into their summer honey yards. Of course, when we move the bees, we have to relocate them at night. So we start to load at dusk. We do have metal straps around the hives, as you can see in this photo. We have a Hummer and a Bobcat that we'll move with, mostly the Hummer and Kate, unless we're needing to move too many in one night that will, take both machines out. And we just move them on trailers that are hauled behind fifth wheel in a pickup truck, so we can move maybe about 160 at a time on a trailer. Here's just a little snapshot of some of the bees that, from maybe, 7 or 8 years ago before we sent them with a super. Sometimes we would load them and leave them on a trailer for a full day before they were able to relocate, just so we could kind of stay ahead of our contracts. And this is them just getting a little busy on a warm day. Blueberries, wild blueberries are Nova Scotia's top agriculture export. On average, I think over a 5-year average, Nova Scotia yields about 45 million pounds annually. And the Atlantic region, which includes Maine and Quebec and New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, puts 300 million pounds of wild blueberries onto the global market. This photo also is another setup that we move bees to blueberries. We have some flat deck trailers that are owned by one of our blueberry growers that we can fit 10 pallets or 40 hives of bees on. And that trailer gets parked in the middle of that blueberry field, and that is how the bees pollinate. So we don't really have a problem with drift. That's probably the most common question I get with this setup. And they still, will fill that super honey. They still do really well, and the grower likes that they're quite mobile. That way they can just hook them on a truck and move them at night themselves. The picture in the bottom right is the bell-shaped blueberry blossom. 500 of our colonies stay really close to home to do high bush blueberry pollination. We also send these hives with a full honey super for them to fill. And high bush blueberries are just like a little bit of a different ballgame. The berry is much larger, and when they enter the market, they will often enter a fresh market, you-pick market, versus wild blueberries, which will go to a frozen market. So most hives are home for summer honey production in June, but we do have about 200 that will shift to cranberry pollination. We throw an extra super on them again when they're in cranberry pollination. This was a very scenic field that we had this past summer that was right on the ocean with a view of Cape Blomidon in the background. We heard a little bit yesterday from Joelle that bees do not make honey on cranberries. That's very true. They come back pretty neutral, and it takes them a little while to get going again. The cranberry growers do often have to spray mid-bloom, and for us, our growers will spray maybe 2/3 of the way through the bloom period, and we'll just pull the bees before that. So the bees will kind of do that first 2/3 of the bloom, and then we will pull them before a spray has to be applied. This was the spray tractor driver hitting one of my pallets this year, so just thought I would add that in. We were just setting the bees up to pull them out so the tractor could get in to do the spray the day after, and took the whole pallet in the ditch. So that took us a little bit to put back together again. So our bee moving season is finally complete. We, of course, have split our crews into days and nights. We're happy to all be kind of on day shift again, and hope that not too many trucks broke down. And this year, no one even called the police on us, so that was nice. So moving into summer, we focus on queen production, supering, mite sampling, and bear fencing. We have black bears, no grizzly bears in Atlantic Canada, and not a massive problem with them. We have about 80 bee yard locations, and about 10 or 12 of them are fenced during the summer. So the next few slides are just some snapshots of a few of my different bee yards. We have pretty diverse summer honey yards. We focus on a lot of pasture land. We do, as I mentioned earlier, keep some bees in orchards all year round. We have quite a lot of yards that are very close to the ocean. You can't get too far from the ocean when you live in Nova Scotia. And this yard is called Macomber. It is standard for us to keep somewhere between 4 and 10 pallets, so 16 and 40 beehives in our yards. And some of our yards are named after the location where they are. So this yard is across the street from Leander Macomber Road. Some of our yards are named after landmarks. Like we have a yard called Ballfield, and some of them are named after local wildlife. For example, we have a yard called Foxhole and a yard called Stinky Cat. This yard is quite simply called Dyke. As you can see, it is on some dike land. We do overwinter our bees outside, but this is one of the exceptions to that rule. This yard gets a very harsh wind and flooding in the spring, so this is an example of one of the ones that we will move away in the fall. That is exactly what I mean by not all yards are created equal. This yard is called Retirement Hill. It is in woodland, basically. It's an 8-pallet yard. A tree fell on the bees a couple of years ago, and the landowner was gracious enough to cut me a seat out of the stump. That's my little bee watching seat at the top. This bee yard was a really neat one to find to put our bees in, because when I had contacted the landowner, I had no idea that over the past maybe 50 years or so, there had actually been 2 beekeepers that had previously used that site. So I guess beekeepers know how to pick them. Finally, this yard is called River, just an example of one of our dairy farm yards that the river tubers like to tube right past. These cows are very curious and often like to look up our truck if they can get to it. Okay, I am going to go a little over time, but sorry, Denny. So when we move into queen production, our queen production starts in early June. This is a little bit later than I would like it to start, but just because our pollination season we're boom or bust moving bees until the beginning of June, so we just have to start when the bees are gone. I run a variety of different sizes of nukes. The nukes in the top left corner are mini styrofoam mating nukes. That's a little brood frame from a mini mating nuke on the right. And on the bottom are 4/5 frame nukes that I had wintered inside that building that year. Most of the time now, I run 6-frame nukes, which I really like and have absolutely no pictures of. But Danny in the next presentation also runs 6-frame nukes, so I'm sure you'll see some photos with her. I select from stock from my own operation, which is very much an ongoing process. That selection happens all the time. Everyone in the crew takes part. And also have some stock that comes from Saskatchewan. A couple of queens on the top are really different colors. And I do get a really kind of rainbow of different colors with those queens. Otherwise, just queen cells and a grafted frame on the go. We have really diverse floral sources and a lot of kind of wildflower blend in Nova Scotia and across the Maritimes. So I mentioned some of the fruit blossoms earlier. We have lots of peach, plum, apricot, pear, apple, blackberry, and of course blueberry and cranberry. Our wildflowers include dandelions, as is pictured below, black locust, Alsike Dutch, and sweet clovers, to name a few. Linden trees, knapweed. Knapweed is the purple thistle flower that's on the left-hand side picture. Goldenrod, jewelweed, and of course, asters. Here are a few of my pollen colors of the rainbow. If you have really diverse floral sources, as we do in Atlantic Canada, you get really diverse pollen colors. We do trap some pollen, as you can see in the top left picture of pollen drawer. Most of this trapped pollen is just for my own use in queen production. I will feed it back to my cell builder hives. We do sell some and market it to health food stores if they request it. The picture in the middle is kind of neat because these bees have a little pollen stripe on their back that comes from the jewelweed flower. That seems like the bees need the help of a few other bees to help get it off again. And the last picture I just want to draw your attention to is the one circled on the bottom, the very elusive blue pollen we get in the spring. I like to think that the more special the pollen color, the better luck it will bring your bees. We're pulling honey in the middle of August. We pull over about 4 weeks. We use fume boards, and we pull the entire crop at one time. It's all just a harvest that gets blended completely all together. We do have a little bit of a fall honey flow that we'll just let the bees keep below as part of their winter stores. And this picture is for Jerry, wherever he is, because he had some really clean overalls in his presentation yesterday, so this one is maybe a little bit in need of a wash. Just a picture of those fume boards, solid honey frame. I don't have any other fall photos, so I'll just go over really quickly that our fall mite treatment is generally formic acid in the form of mite away quick strips. We don't use a finishing treatment of oxalic acid. We do quite a lot of mite sampling during the summer and find that our Apivar treatment is successful enough that with a formic acid treatment, our mite levels are looking really good. We finish our feeding by about October 15th on the outside, but usually we're done about a week ahead of that. Just a few about our honey house and our honey, and then I promise I'll wrap up. We just started a Cowan 60 line last year. We do use the deboxer at the beginning of the line. Our honey is very slow to crystallize. The same crew of beekeepers we have that pull the honey are the ones that extract the honey. We have one big crew. And we don't feel that we're in too big of a rush to get the honey out of the comb because it is very slow over several months to crystallize. So it does accumulate in the barn. This is Tom, Bossman Tom, filling the first honey drum of 2019. We have an 18-barrel capacity tank in the bottling room, and our new line has really increased our efficiency by 3 times. Just a couple other shots, pretty basic setup. We have a mounted heat exchanger. That space behind the heat exchanger is also used to store empty barrels. And to the left of the hot room, we have a door that opens directly to our winter storage, so we can just take our supers straight and wrap them and have them in for winter storage. And we also have a cooking bale spit float. We have a separate building with our bottling lines. We do pack and distribute all of our own honey. This line was put together by a Montreal company, Numapack, and every part of the line comes from a different company, so please let me know after if you'd like any information on any specific part of it. We do only liquid honey in this building. The 4 main sizes that we ship to grocery stores are done here, and we just fill 1 jar at a time. Have a 4-barrel honey oven there as well, a tank that can hold about 4 barrels. We have a labeler, a lock code printer, cap tightener, just a pretty automated line that can be run by 2 people. Our honey is a really big variety of different colors because it's all a wildflower blend. This picture of the 3 different shades was from the farmer's market, just 3 different weeks of honey extraction that we had that year. So we do get a really beautiful different blend of colors and wildflowers. The top picture is creamed honey, and the bottom picture is our honey store in Greenwich, which is just kind of you can come in, take some honey, and leave your money. It's just still based on the honesty of the people that live close by. We do about 600 kilos of comb honey harvest annually as well, which goes direct to the farmer's market. Usually the early comb honey is Alsike clover and blackberry, and the later is goldenrod, which is a little darker, and that's what is pictured here. Last couple slides, I promise. This is our beeswax candle production. Beeswax candles are just a little bit of a fun thing that we do on the side. We have very beautiful wax color in all across Atlantic Canada, which we really credit to our wildflower blend and our goldenrod. We use very much our own wax and have several hundred molds to choose from. Lastly, we do wrap our hives for the winter, even though this is the only winter picture I could find, and they're not wrapped. So generally we wrap, again, with just the stretch black pallet wrap and 1.5-inch styrofoam on top, and entrance users, pretty simple. We do have common covers that go over top of all 4 colonies on the pallet. And yeah. So just to finish, this is our kind of 2019 bee crew for the year, all 6 of us. Tom is in the middle with the suspenders, and his 2 sons, Simon and Ivan, are on either side. And then our 2 summer guys, Dean and Connor, kneeling in the front. So I would just like to, 5-year-old me, just like a bee, would like to just thank the few people that helped me with this. Peter Brutus from McCallum, Sawyer Olmsted of Ada, Jason Sproul, Cameron Menzies, Courtney Pickering, Cosmo and Honey Crew, Roger Reed, Catherine Dempsey, and Maxine McLean for helping me put this presentation together. Thank you very much.